So my answer to that question, is Micro Four Thirds dead? No. You know, spoiler alert, no. This video is going to be very squinty, I have a feeling. There's a baseball game going on behind me here, and it's right before sunset, which is why I'm super squinty. So I'm filming on my old school camera. I thought I'd do something kind of throwbacky. So this is the Panasonic G85, my old school camera. I've had this camera for I think 4 years now, 3 or 4 years. I started doing YouTube-y kind of stuff in 2017, and this is the camera that I used for most of that content until I switched to Sony mirrorless cameras, the aps-c sensor, and most recently the full frame sensor with the Sony a7C. The G85 that you're seeing right now with the 12-35 f2.8 lens is still an amazing camera and lens combo. So I've been getting these comments in my channel since I switched to Sony that are basically like, yo, what's up with Micro Four Thirds? What do you think about Micro Four Thirds as a format? Is Micro Four Thirds dead? I don't think any format is really dead as long as there are people that are still finding some type of usage out of it. I mean, it's a very subjective type of thing. I'm trying not to step in an anthill or dog poop. I could do like a full video where I compare Micro Four Thirds, like my G85, to my Sony a7C, which is a completely unfair comparison because number one, Micro Four Thirds, the sensor is a lot smaller than full frame sensors. It's actually about half the size of a full frame sensor. One of my favorite things about this camera, the Panasonic G85, is it has amazing image stabilization, and it has it built in to the I don't know why I'm expecting there to be no noise near a baseball field. Even though the technology is about 3 or 4 years old at this point, the image stabilization is really awesome. Like, I'm not using a gimbal. It's all handheld right now, just on a simple tripod. And I think this looks really awesome. That's one thing that I miss on the Sony cameras, like especially the a7C, which is an amazing camera. It's full frame, it's cute and all that stuff. But the stabilization on the a7C and pretty much every Sony camera that I've used, even though it has in-body image stabilization, which they call steady shot, I don't think the quality of that is really good. But where I think the biggest downfall of the G85 is with autofocus. And right now I'm being a little adventurous. I'm using face and eye tracking mode on the G85, which is not known to be the most accurate. Actually, most of the time the autofocus is pretty good. It's pretty decent, but there are definitely moments where it'll go out of focus and focus on something in the background or something and never quite get the focus back onto my face. And I'm shooting this all in low light right now. Like, the sun is kind of, I don't know if you can see it, but no, you can't see it. Dynamic range. Yeah, you can't see the sun, but the sun is going down right now, and I purposely am shooting right now to kind of test the limits of the Micro Four Thirds sensors. So one of the ways in which gear actually does matter is if you're trying to shoot in low light, Micro Four Thirds can be pretty frustrating. You know, this footage still looks pretty good. It's still definitely usable because if it stays in focus, I think this camera is actually a really awesome camera. And a lot of the times, I don't even think you would notice the difference between full frame and this camera unless you put them side by side. So one thing that I also think the G85 really has going for it is the size of the body. It feels like a baby pocket camera now in a good way. Like, it's really lightweight, and when you combine a pretty lightweight lens such as the 12-35, which is, you know, a pretty decently sized but lightweight lens, when you combine a small lens with this body, it still looks really good and it still functions really well, and it feels lightweight in the hand. So if you're doing a lot of like handheld vlogging, and again, you don't need, you know, the most crazy autofocus or something, I still think this camera holds up really well in 2021. One thing I really love about the G85 is it has a fully articulating screen that swings all around, and it's a touch screen, and you can actually touch the screen to change the menu items and all that stuff, something that you can't do on the Sony cameras, even the Sony a7C. I think it's so handy to have that flip out screen, especially if you're doing shots like this where you're shooting yourself, you know, the talking head kind of thing, or if you're vlogging or something, taking a selfie. The G85 also has a mic input, which is how I'm able to record the juicy audio on this camera. It doesn't have a headphones input, so you can't hear what you're recording live, but I like that this camera has a microphone input, and I also like that the SD card slot is on one side of the camera. It's really easy to access. It's not on the bottom, you know, under the flap or anything. It has its own port on the side, and there's only one SD card slot on this camera, but for most purposes, I don't really need a second SD card slot. Even the A7C doesn't have a second card slot, because I don't really need it most of the time. But if you want a double card slot, you probably shouldn't get the G85. Get something more like the G9 or the G85. Another thing I really like ergonomically about the G85 is it has a pretty decent grip on the side that makes it pretty easy to hold. And it has a little bit of texture to it too, and it's also weather sealed, so it's a pretty awesome camera for, you know, if you're stuck in the rain or if you're in a misty spot or something, or there's liquids splashing on you. This camera is really good for all that. Images and videos look so crisp on this camera. It only has a 16 megapixel sensor, which gives you decent size images, but the images look awesome. There's plenty of background separation, background blur. With this camera, if you pair it with a low aperture lens, such as this one, an f2.8, or something like the 12mm f1.4 lens. But one of the downfalls of the Micro Four Thirds sensor, because it is so small, it doesn't collect as much light. So when you're in a lower light situation, such as, you know, the setting sun that I'm sitting in right now, it's starting to get pretty dim right now, and the ISO tends to have to be bumped up pretty high in order to get a really decent looking shot. If you're shooting in even lower light where you don't even have any of this kind of magic hour glow anymore, it starts to look kind of trash, and there's definitely a lot of graininess going on. The details don't look as sharp. For handheld stuff, if you shoot a lot of low light, I wouldn't recommend a Micro Four Thirds sensor, and I might say go for something like a Sony aps-c camera, the a6400, a6600, something like that, or even go full frame like the a7C if you have the budget. Another thing about Panasonic cameras that I really like is color science on these cameras. Like, my skin tones usually look really good on this camera using the natural color mode. That's what I'm shooting on right now. I would even go to say that Panasonic does skin tones better than Sony in general, even with a camera like the G85 that's several years old now, even in lower light situations. And my camera is slowly moving, and it's gone. Also, when it comes to the design of the G85, it has a pretty good amount of customization, like the function buttons that you can customize on the back and on the top of the camera. So you can do a pretty good amount of that on the G85. It's not going to have as much as a camera such as the G9. And speaking of the G9, if you want a camera that is similar to the G85, but you have a little more of a budget, and you want to stay in the Micro Four Thirds system, I would highly recommend the G9, which is also from Panasonic. It's an amazing camera, and I use that on many of my YouTube videos as well. And you can get a used G9 for about $800 now, which is actually pretty incredible, because that camera is another underrated camera. Seriously? Don't they know that I'm trying to film a YouTube video? Is this camera worth it in 2021? I think totally. As long as you are cool with knowing that the autofocus can be very unreliable if you use a lot of autofocus, especially in video, this is not a camera I would recommend for you. But if you're manually focusing and you just want a cheaper 4K camera where you can exchange the lenses, I think the G85 is actually a really good deal, and you can get this camera on Amazon for like $500, including a kit lens, which is actually a really good lens. This is a camera that's very underrated, and I still think it has really excellent quality in 2021. But let me know in the comments what you think about all this footage that you're seeing today. So anyway, I hope this video was useful for you. If you have any questions or comments about this, let me know down below. You can also hit me up in the Discord channel. Link is below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Y'all, they're still beeping. What the hell? It's still going. What is going on?